In the early 20th century, a freaky, enigmatic phenomenon gripped the world, leaving a trail of intrigue and questions in its wake. Emerging amidst the shadows of a devastating influenza pandemic and on the precipice of the Great War, an obscure neurological condition quietly captured the imagination of scientists and the curiosity of the public. As nations grappled with the chaos and carnage on the battlefields, medical professionals scrambled to comprehend the enigmatic disease that was silently making its entrance. Pervaded by profound slumber and an array of bewildering symptoms, this ominous ailment became known by various names. Its origins obscured, its cause veiled in uncertainty. It remains an enigma to this day. In this narrative, we explore the intriguing convergence of warfare and an evasive neurological adversary, shedding light on the historic era when this disease etched its mysterious legacy onto the collective memory of a world gripped by conflict. Ladies and gents, the subject of today's episode is the puzzling Encephalitis Lethargica, also known as von Economo's disease or the sleepy sickness. Encephalitis lethargica is a rare neurological syndrome that was first identified during the early 20th century, specifically in the span of 1916-1930. The disease gained considerable attention and historical significance due to its association with the influenza pandemic of 1918-1919, commonly known as the Spanish flu. Encephalitis lethargica was first recognized as a distinct clinical entity by the Austrian neurologist Constantin von Economo. However, it wasn't until the influenza pandemic that the disease garnered widespread attention. The first encounter with this ailment occurred in late 1916 when Dr. Economo was examining patients who showed unusual neurological symptoms in the psychiatric neurological clinic of the University of Vienna. These patients had been admitted with varying diagnoses such as meningitis, multiple sclerosis, and delirium. However, none of them matched well into any known diagnostic scheme. In particular, many of the patients presented with evident lethargy. Von Economo considered the uniqueness of this set of symptoms as a distinct disease entity, which he described in a 1917 manuscript entitled Encephalitis Lethargica. Concurrent to von Economo, French physician René Cruchet was treating similar patients in a military hospital for neuropsychiatric disorders. Cruchet too believed that these cases differed from previous cases of encephalomyelitis, and his own description of the disease was published within a few days of von Economo's. According to Oxford University Press article by Leslie Hoffman, in 1921 it was proposed that the initial appearance of encephalitis lethargica during the epidemic period was in early 1915 rather than 1916 and most likely in Romania. The movement of troops across Europe during World War I likely enabled the spread of Encephalitis lethargica, which reached epidemic status in Vienna in 1917, followed by France and England in 1918. By 1919, the epidemic had overrun most of Europe, the USA, Canada, Central America, and India. During the epidemic period, peaks of Encephalitis lethargica occurred in 1920 and 1924. Subsequently, acute cases became less common, although many patients suffered chronic neurological sequelae that persisted long after the epidemic period. The disease manifested with various neurological symptoms, but the most notable feature was the profound sleepiness or prolonged periods of drowsiness that affected the patients. It was classically characterized by an acute and a chronic phase. During the acute phase, patients typically experience excessive sleepiness, disorders of ocular motility, fever, and movement disorders, although virtually any neurological sign or symptom could be exhibited, with day-to-day and even hour-by-hour shifts in symptoms. The chronic phase could occur months to years later and was most commonly characterized by Parkinsonian-like signs. Acute encephalitis lethargica often presented as a gradual onset of nondescript flu-like symptoms, including low-grade fever, pharyngitis, shivering, headache, vertigo, and vomiting. Neurological symptoms followed and could present very quickly, as in the case of a girl who experienced a sudden hemiplegia while walking home from a concert. Within half an hour she was asleep and died 12 days later. To help simplify diagnosis among the vast array of symptoms, Dr. Economo classified acute encephalitis lethargica into 3 forms: somnolent ophthalmoplegic, hyperkinetic, and amyostatic akinetic. The somnolent ophthalmoplegic form was the most common and typically developed soon after onset of initial symptoms. Patients became dazed, confused, and delirious, and often exhibited features of mild meningeal irritation. Cranial nerve pulses were also a common feature. Most notably, patients experienced an overwhelming desire to sleep and would sleep for abnormally long periods of time, but were easily awakened and often aware of everything that had transpired around them while in this state of pseudo-somnolence. The mortality rate for the somnolent ophthalmoplegic form was higher than that of other forms of encephalitis lethargica, exceeding 50%. However, a greater number of survivors experienced few or no long-term sequelae than in other forms. The hyperkinetic form presented with an initial manic phase, during which the patient experienced chorea, vocalizations, myoclonic twitches, and myarrhythmia of the ocular and masticatory muscles. The manic phase was followed by generalized restlessness, weakness, and fatigue that persisted for days. During this hypomanic phase, patients experienced neuralgic pain in the face and limbs, visual and tactile hallucinations, and day-night sleep cycle reversal. The amyostatic akinetic form was the least common form of acute encephalitis lethargica proposed by von Economo. With this form, patients experienced rigidity and lack of movement with no noticeable weakness. Patients were very slow to alter their posture, and any such movements were minimal. They would often exhibit waxy flexibility. In this state, they remained rigid and immobile for long periods of time, but the rigidity could be overcome with slight external force. Patients with the amyostatic akinetic form remained mentally intact, but emotions were hardly noticeable. Recovery could be slow or rapid, with the condition sometimes lasting several months. The chronic phase of encephalitis lethargica typically developed 1 to 5 years after the acute phase, but it could also follow immediately or more than a decade later. The chronic phase was characterized by Parkinsonism, but sleep disturbances, oculomotor abnormalities, involuntary movements, speech and respiratory abnormalities, and psychiatric disorders were also common features. In the decades following the epidemic, it was estimated that as many as 50% of Parkinsonism cases were post-encephalitic. Chronic encephalitis lethargica was also associated with psychiatric manifestations, which included changes in mood, feelings of euphoria, increased sexual drive, hallucinations, joviality, and silliness. Psychosis was present in 30% of patients, but milder psychiatric disorders were very common. Mental changes appear to be more pronounced in children than in adults, with reports of self-mutilation, including one extreme case involving an 8-year-old girl who extracted all of her teeth and self-enucleated both of her eyes. The exact cause of encephalitis lethargica remains unknown even after a century of research. Despite the existence of countless theories, there are 2 main categories of plausible etiologies: environmental or toxicological, and infectious or viral and bacterial. More recently, however, there is evidence to support a third theory, which points towards autoimmunity. It is also possible that encephalitis lethargica has multiple causes, which could explain the wide array of etiological hypotheses that have been advanced over the years. When confronted with his first cases of encephalitis lethargica in 1917, Dr. Economo speculated on the cause of the disease. He ruled out any toxic process such as food poisoning, because patients exhibited no gastrointestinal disturbances. Also, there was often only a single case within a household, and some victims were exclusively breastfed infants. He also ruled out poison gas, typhoid, polio, and syphilis as cause of the disease. Noting that all the patients had presented with an influenza-like early symptom and considering the coexistent Spanish influenza epidemic, von Economo considered the possibility that encephalitis lethargica was an influenza encephalitis. Indeed, there have been prior accounts of sleeping sickness or encephalitis associated with influenza epidemics. Although there were neuropathological differences in the brains of patients who died of encephalitis lethargica compared with those who died of influenza encephalitis, von Economo could not deny that there seemed to be an epidemiological connection between influenza and encephalitis lethargica. Based on experimental studies using brain tissue from deceased patients, Dr. Economo concluded that encephalitis lethargica was caused by an infectious virus. He and other clinicians at the time proposed that influenza might predispose a person to infection with the disease, possibly by increasing the receptiveness of the nasal mucous membranes, allowing the encephalitic virus to enter more easily. Following the epidemic, the incidence of encephalitis lethargica declined dramatically, and it became an extremely rare condition. However, sporadic cases have been reported since then, and occasional clusters of cases have suggested a possible resurgence of the disease. Researchers and scientists have continued to investigate the condition, but many aspects of encephalitis lethargica remain poorly understood. Apart from its medical and scientific implications, encephalitis lethargica had a cultural impact as well. The disease's mysterious nature and its portrayal in literature, such as Oliver Sacks's book Awakenings, which detailed his experiences treating post-encephalitic patients, sparked public interest. The book was later adapted into the 1990 Hollywood film starring Robin Williams and Robert De Niro. Encephalitis lethargica also left a lasting legacy in the form of post-encephalitic Parkinsonism. Some individuals who survived the acute phase of the illness developed long-term complications, including Parkinson's disease-like symptoms, several years later. This condition, known as post-encephalitic Parkinsonism, further emphasized the devastating impact of encephalitis lethargica on the affected individuals. To sum up, the enigmatic encephalitis lethargica, with its mysterious origins and lingering questions, left an indelible mark on the pages of history. The disease had a significant impact on public health, causing considerable morbidity and mortality. As the syndrome waned and the world moved forward, its impact continued to reverberate. Countless lives were forever altered, their experiences serving as a reminder of the intricate interplay between medical science, human resilience, and the mysteries that still elude our understanding. Encephalitis lethargica remains a captivating enigma, a testament to the fragility and resilience of the human brain, and a haunting reminder that amidst the progress of medical knowledge, there are still mysteries that persist. In our ongoing quest for answers, we remain captivated by the story of this perplexing disease, forever seeking to unveil the secrets it holds and to bring solace to those who bear its enduring legacy. Thank you for watching.